Somebody told me about this book, The Miseducation of the Negro, about 2 years before I actually read it. I don't remember who that person was, but they changed my life because this book changed my life. And I have one question for you. Are you ready to change your life? In a nutshell, this book explains the biggest challenge facing the Black American community: how we think. How we think about ourselves, each other, and our place in the world. And what's really shocking is this book was published in 1933, but the majority of the challenges, down to the itty-bitty details, still exist today. The challenges of, you guessed it, miseducation. Chapters 1 through 5 outline the origin of the problem, stemming from, of course, slavery. Chapters 6 through 12 explain the debilitating damage. And chapters 13 through 18 provide possible solutions. And who doesn't love solutions? The author, Carter G. Woodson, is also the founder of Negro History Week, which became our beloved Black History Month. So if you celebrate the achievements of Black people in February, guess what? You are part of the solution. But today, let's learn how we can take it a step further. At the root of the problem is the lack of confidence and an inferiority complex. Woodson believes this is due to not being adequately taught about Black accomplishments in the world, and because African Americans are indirectly taught that the only important achievements in the world were made by those from European countries. The belief is, in order to get the best and be the best, assimilation and imitation are not only preferred, but necessary. Woodson believes this hinders us by preventing us from investing in ourselves and each other. On page 31, he says, "The education of any people should begin with the people themselves, but the Negroes thus trained have been dreaming about the ancients of Europe and about those who have tried to imitate them." Only recently has there been a mass push to support Black-owned businesses because of the miseducation that promotes distrust and the lack of support in anything dealing with Black people. On page 35, he outlines how Black people have always been quick to brag about and exaggerate failures in Black-owned businesses. And on page 36, he says, "The Negro businessmen have made mistakes, and they are still making them. But the weak link in the chain is that they are not properly supported and do not always grow strong enough to pass through a crisis." As this pandemic has shown us, a business can be as strong as it needs to be, but if they do not have that support in the crunch time, then the business is prone to failure. And this has always been the case for the Black community because we have been miseducated to believe that we shouldn't support or appreciate our own businesses because we have been miseducated to think that anything associated with Blackness is inferior and not worth our time. He further illustrates the miseducation by pointing out how in that time, a state legislature killed a bill that would have the Constitution taught in schools to prevent the Negro from learning to contend for his rights. That had the effect of making Black people feel like they shouldn't ask for specifics from their government or that they shouldn't expect tangibles in politics. Page 54 depicts a scenario that you might still see today. It says, "These Negro critics were especially hard on Negroes of our day who engage in agitation for actual democracy. Negroes themselves in certain parts join with the whites then, in keeping out of schools the teachers who may be bold enough to teach the truth as it is. They usually say, the races here are getting along amicably now, and we do not want these peaceful relations disturbed by the teaching of new political thought." That example shows how severely terrorized Black Americans have been and still are to be petrified of speaking up for themselves or even to see someone else do it. And that fear may manifest in extreme criticism, ridicule, or even ignoring those who speak a little bit more radically. This leads to loss of hope in the group and makes many turn to selfish gain for survival. On page 65, he says, "The selfish struggle for personal aggrandizement, which has not yet brought either faction more than an appointment on the police force or a clerkship in one of the city offices, thus blocks the social and economic progress of thousands of unoffending people." Basically saying, we limit our potential when we only focus on selfish gain rather than moving the entire group forward, even though he understands the factors that lead to that. He also critiques leadership. portraying how often the most influential Black leaders are appointed by the oppressor. Also on page 65, he says, the oppressor must have some dealing with the despised group, and rather than have contact with individuals, he approaches the masses through his own spokesman. These Black appointees will be supplied with wealth and perceived status to make their words more believable. In today's times, that might look like a spot on CNN, MSNBC, or even a blue check on the socials. But this is tricky because once the masses find out about the scheme, they distrust all leadership, even those with a good message. And they label those telling the real truth as crazy, because our miseducation demonizes self-sufficiency in the Black community. He proposes genuine service as a solution. On page 67, he says, under leadership, we have been made to despise our own possibilities and to develop into parasites. By service, we may prove sufficient unto the task of self-development and contribute our part to modern culture. To keep this short and sweet, I am going to speed this up a little bit. So in chapters 14 and 15, he talks about higher education and vocational trades, how we need to be developing the intellectuals, but also our workforce. However, he does criticize how often Black people will beg for a seat at the table rather than creating one for themselves. On page 84, he says, the Negro as a slave developed this fatal sort of dependency, and restricted mainly to menial service and drudgery during nominal freedom, he has not grown out of it. Now the Negro is facing the ordeal of either learning to do for himself or to die out gradually in the breadline in the ghetto. Now I think that might be a little bit harsh, because a lot of times our people don't just want a handout, but like as he clearly illustrates in this book, we've been conditioned to not really want more for ourselves because we've been conditioned that we can't really do more. Messages of our criminality, our shortcomings, and the ways that we've been conquered have been reiterated into the American education system. The history where African countries and African leaders really set the standard is what's being left out and glossed over. And he believes that if we talk more about those things and the ways that we contributed to society and left our mark, then we'll be more empowered to learn how we can do new things for our own communities. After we begin to rebuild our minds and communities, we have to own and embrace our history. The good, the bad, the better, and the worst. On page 99, Woodson says, the Negro can be made proud of his past only by approaching it scientifically himself and giving his own story to the world. What others have written about the Negro during these last 3 centuries has been mainly for the purpose of bringing him where he is today and holding him there. And this reminds me of that quote, it's like, until the lion learns to write his own story, the tale will always glorify the hunter, or something like that, y'all. When we let other people teach us about us, they're gonna leave the parts out that would empower us. They probably don't want to empower the Black community to know how strong they are because they know that they've done a lot wrong to the Black community. Overall, this is a very short and pleasant read. It's just about 100 pages. I think that he does a great job breaking it down and citing real and historical examples. It's really cool to see like the examples he gives in real time in the 30s because he's talking from a place of where most of us have to research. And so he's telling you like, this is how it really is. I believe the main person that he's addressing is the highly educated Negro or the Black intellectual rather than the less educated Black person. He does address the lack of funding in education, but I think that his main point is for us to take ownership of our plight and change it ourselves rather than waiting and depending on the morality of others. So in conclusion, we need to examine the education from our oppressor and its intentions. Examine our self-confidence and self-worth as a result of the education. We need to value each other in our communities again by focusing on service rather than leadership. And finally, we have to own our history, all of it, and tell our story ourselves. Thank you so much for watching this review. I truly hope this was helpful, and I really want to know what you think about this book, so be sure to let me know in the comments. And until next time, family, seek the kingdom and serve the community.